Hi everyone and welcome to the Stitch Sessions. Today we're going to work on this beautiful ribs and rows pattern. Now I've created this lovely scarf and I've done it in this beautiful colorway. It's the roll with it, the tweed line. I think it's Red Heart. I'll have to double check that. And this pattern was great. I made this for a gentleman, so I love the colorway. But this is also a fantastic pattern for practicing your front post and back post stitches. So I thought we would do a great little tutorial on this where I'm going to do it in two parts. So today we're going to talk about creating a flat project. So you may remember that at the end of 2019, I talked about how I was going to start introducing some patterns in two fashions, one in a flat project and one working in the round. So that way you can take the stitch or the pattern and use it to create some of your own creations. So in this case, I made this a lovely scarf, which I really love how it came out so beautiful and textured. And it was just an alternation of using front post double crochets and back post double crochets, and then creating a few rows in the middle of single crochets. And it just gives it just the right amount of texture, a little bit more on the, I would say a little bit more on the masculine side, but certainly, these patterns can go anyway, but especially with this lovely, beautiful gray beigey color, just came out so pretty, and I'm really excited to show you the pattern. Okay, guys, so for this pattern, you can use whichever yarn that you choose. I've got this beautiful medium weight size 4. This was some leftovers from the Pantone yarns that were out very trendy a couple years ago. And for this particular project, I'm going to be using a 5.5 millimeter hook with this yarn. You can use the hook and yarn of your choice, of course, as always. And as always, make sure you have a darning needle on hand and a pair of scissors to sew in your ends. So just going to get that out of the way. So let's begin. To create our beautiful ribs and row pattern, you want to begin with a slip knot. So we're going to start with our foundation chain row, and it could be any number as long as it's an odd number, okay? So for this, because I'm just doing a swatch, I'm going to do 21 chains. Now, for that particular scarf that I did, I ended up doing 35 chains, okay? So again, it depends on the width of the project that you want to do. If you're doing a blanket, obviously you're going to need quite a few more chains, but just make sure that it's an odd number. So I'm going to go ahead and do 21. Once you have your odd number of chains, you now want to chain an additional 2. 1 and 2. So what we're going to do for the first 2 rows, I call it the establishing rows. And what that means is my project is flanked with 2 rows of double crochets that are not part of the repeat. So it just kind of gave it this nice little bookend. So these first 2 rows will not really be repeated. They're just kind of there to anchor the project, I like to call it. So that's why we did an additional 2 chains. So now what we're going to do is we're going to find the 4th chain from the hook, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in that 4th chain, we're going to do a double crochet. So you'll always pull through 2 first and then pull through the next 2. Okay, so that leaves you with these 3 chains here. They do count as 1 double crochet. So that will be part of your count. Now we're going to do for the rest of the chain row is we're going to just do 1 double crochet into each chain. Okay, and you just, as always, you want to keep it very relaxed because that first chain row, it's very easy for it to get tight, and then it will cause your work to bunch up. Okay, so there you can see it's starting to take shape. So go ahead and do that. 1 double crochet into each chain stitch all the way to the end, and I will meet you here. And I'm just coming up to my very last chain, and your work should now look something like this. So you want to make sure, just double check that you still have your odd number of stitches all the way across. So I started off with 21 stitches, 21 chains. I added the 2, and that helped me create this first double crochet here at the end, which is that chain 3. So at the end, I'm still going to have 21 stitches. It's very important that it's an odd number, and you'll see why in a little bit. So for row 2, what we're going to do is we're going to chain 1. Now some people will do a chain 3, and I do use the chain 3 many times. For this particular project, I'm only doing a chain 1, and I am going to then double crochet right back into the base of that stitch right there. A lot of times if you chain 3, you would not go into that stitch, you would go into the next one. But I want to create a nice full fluffy look. So that's why I only chained 1, and I'm going to go right back into that same stitch, and I'm going to double crochet. Now that chain 1, that loop on my hook, see how it's fairly loose? It needs to stay fairly loose if you're only going to do a chain 1. So see, it just kind of creates a nice little chunky look to the end. Okay, if you're more comfortable using the chain 3, go ahead and do that. It doesn't, you know, for me, it's personal preference, right? As far as I'm concerned, it depends on the project, how I feel about it. For this particular project, I'm using the chain 1 and crocheting into the same stitch method. And so for this establishing row, for the second row, it's just the same thing. Now you've got actual stitches to work into, and we're just going to do 1 double crochet into each stitch. Super simple. And it's going to look so beautiful and textured, but it's such a great pattern to practice your stitches, especially if you're a little bit new. And if you're not so new, it's still interesting enough to, well, it was interesting enough to keep me motivated anyway. So a lot of times we can take simple stitches and create this lovely, beautiful, amazing, what looks fancy and complicated. It's kind of like dancing. Many of you know I teach ballroom and Latin dancing. And sometimes the students want to jump ahead and do all these extra fancy moves. But if you ever see top level professionals just dancing their basics, but doing them so incredibly well, it's just incredible how different it can look as opposed to just kind of stumbling or schluffing through the basic steps, right? So it's just like crochet. If you can find many different ways to work on your basics to create these extra fancy, textured, beautiful patterns. Look at that. Okay, so I'm gonna leave you there. I can ramble on and on. So finish to the end of row 2. This is gonna be our establishing row. And then we're going to start our repeat, okay? So go ahead and finish this, and I'll meet you guys there. Okay, so I just thought I would meet up with you guys just as we got to the end. This is our initial chain 3. So it can be easy sometimes to miss it, first of all, because it looks like we're done. But see how it creates this little jut in? You want to be careful with that. Otherwise, you'll end up with 1 stitch less, okay? So we want to yarn over, and you're going to find the top of that chain 3. Now, if it's hard to see, sometimes I'll just turn it over this way where I can see the V's. Right there, that's the top of our chain 3. And I just insert my hook and pull through and finish the stitch. Okay, so now our establishing rows look like that. It's such a pretty color too. And then again, always make sure you've got the right number of stitches, which I do. I still have my 21. Now what we're going to do is we're going to chain 1 again and turn our work. So this is going to be the beginning of the repeat section. So it's a 4-row repeat. Wow, that's a mouthful. But you're going to be amazed at how simple it is going to be. So we've chained one, and what we're going to do is we're just going to go back into that very first stitch and we're going to do a single crochet. Just like that. And now we're going to do a single crochet into each stitch all the way to the end. Okay, so you just insert, pull through. And this pattern really needs a relaxed tension, a relaxed stitch. I don't know, some people are naturally tight crocheters or tight knitters, but some patterns really do call for just keeping it super relaxed. It's what makes it so nice and cozy. So there you see it's looking like that. So now we're just crunching down the stitch a little bit. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to do one single crochet all the way to the end. This is what I would call row 1 of the repeat, okay? But it's technically row 3 of your work. But these first 2 rows, we're not going to repeat again until the very end of your project. So technically, this is row 1 of our repeat. Row 1 and 2 are simply going to be one single crochet into every stitch all the way to the end. When you get here, remember the top of your chain 3, chain 1, turn your work, and do a single crochet again into each stitch all the way back. You will have 2 rows of single crochets. And that's it. So row 1 and row 2 are the same. One single crochet into each stitch. So I will set you loose, and you're going to do your 2 rows of single crochets, and then I'm going to meet you at the top of row 3, and that's where the fun really begins. Remember, at the end, always find that top of your chain 3 or your chain 1. Chain 1 and turn your work. And you still need to have an uneven or an odd number of stitches. Okay, so I just wanted to show you, I'm coming up to the end of round 2. So this was the chain 1. And we had gone back into that same space. Some people will skip it. Again, depending on the project, I do too, but this time I did not. So it is a little easier for me to find. So that's my chain 1. So just make sure I insert into that space and I single crochet. And of course I counted and I still have my 21 stitches. So it's just gorgeous. First of all, this yarn does feel lovely. Many of you know I'm not generally a big fan of the Pantone yarns, just for logistical reasons, but it does feel very, very lovely. So there we go. We've done row 1 and row 2 of single crochets. Now we're going to go into row 3 of the repeat. Again, you're going to be amazed how simple this is. So we're going to chain 1, turn our work, and now we're going to go back into doing double crochets. Okay, so still basic stitches. Now, I've kept that chain 1 kind of loose. You know why? Because I'm going to work right back into the base of that same stitch. Okay, so the base is this right there that belongs here. So I'm going to go right back in there, and I'm going to do my double crochet. And just because for this project I want the end stitches to be nice and cushy, just like that. Okay? See? Easy peasy. So again, we're going to get a chance to practice our double crochets all the way across, and 1 into each stitch, and I'll meet you at the end. Okay, so far you might be going, I don't really see anything too different yet. So we've got our 2 established rows of double crochets, and then we've got these 2 shorter rows here of single crochets. Now we did another row of double crochets. So this is row 3 of our repeat. We're now going to go into row 4, which is the final row of the repeat of this pattern. So you're still going to chain 1, turn your work, and this is how you're going to begin row 4 every single time. So row 4 is what really creates the texture. We're going to go back into the base of that same stitch, and we're going to do 1 double crochet. Okay, just like we did in the previous row, keeping it nice and relaxed. Now, here's where things are going to change. Instead of working into the next stitch, we are going to work around the next post right there. So we are going to do a front post double crochet. Now we've got a couple of tutorials on these techniques that we're going to put in the description box down below, and probably have a little link up here in the cards too if you ever just want to have a look at the slow version. But right here we're going to take our time as well, and this is why this project is so good to practice these techniques. So we're going to yarn over like a regular double crochet, and now instead of into the stitch, we're going to go in between the posts, and then we're going to come back around. So what we're doing is we're pushing this post to the front. See that? Now we're going to yarn over, and we're going to pull that through like we normally would. We're just going to kind of bring it up a wee bit. Okay, so you've got 3 loops on the hook like usual. You're going to yarn over, pull through the first 2 like you normally would, and then you'll yarn over and resolve the double crochet as usual. So what that does is it's pulling this post forward. So you can see now that that's creating a bit of a bump there, which is exactly what we want. Okay, now we're going to go on to the next stitch. Now, the next stitch, we are also not going to work into the stitch. So this whole row is going to be worked around the posts. But in this next post, we're going to go behind. So we're going to do a back post double crochet. So you're going to yarn over, and instead of going in through the front, we're going to go in through the back and then out the other side. So what this will do, just going to move that out of the way, is it pushes the post to the back of your work. Okay, and that's why it's called a back post double crochet. Once we've done that, we will yarn over and pull it through, careful not to catch the other threads. And we're just going to resolve like a regular double crochet, first through 2, then through the next 2. Okay, so now when we lay it flat, you can see the front post pushes to the front, and the back post is kind of sitting hidden there. So that's what we're going to alternate. This is what's going to give us that really cool, bumpy texture. So we're going to continue on. We're going to repeat the front post, back post, front post, back post. So it's going to be an alternating rhythm. So now be careful that you don't work into this, because we've already worked into that with the back post. Okay, so yarn over, go to the next post, which is right here. We're going to do a front post. That means we go in through the front and behind, yarn over, then we resolve the double crochet as usual. Okay, so now you can see the back post is poking through there, or peeking through, I should say. The next stitch will be a back post. So we go in from behind and back out to push that post to the back. See that? See, and then your yarn is here waiting for you. You just pull it through and then yarn over and resolve the double crochet as usual. Okay, so now we've done 2 sets. So now you can see it's starting to create some bumpiness, which is what we want. And don't worry if you see this kind of collapsing in. As you continue on as you continue on with the row, it will take shape. Okay, so that's what we're going to do for row 4. And that's the last of our repeat. We're going to start off with a front post double crochet. And then we will do a back post. So I know it can be a little awkward. You have to go in from behind and through, okay? So it's not that it's too challenging. It just can take some patience, because it will feel a little awkward at the beginning how to kind of hold your work and handle the stitch. So you can see now we're creating some stitches here, some nice texture. So go ahead and do that. And hopefully it's going to become apparent at the end why it's important to keep this stitch pattern in an odd number of stitches, because we will always begin row 4 with a regular double crochet stitch. And by keeping the regular on each end, it will flank the work. And you need to have an odd number of stitches in order to do that. Okay, so I'll touch on this again once I meet you back at the last stitch here. So just before you finish your last stitch, I'm going to meet you here in the last post, okay? So front post, back post, front post, back post, all the way to the end. And I'm just doing my last front post double crochet. And so now I've come to where I did the chain one and the regular double crochet. So we're going to work a regular double crochet into the top of that stitch, which is right there. Okay, so there's no front post or back post here. We just want to do a regular, whoops, double crochet, just like that. So now you can see, so there you go. Now you can really see the texture coming through. And because we alternated, it's reversible. So it looks the same way on the back as it does on the front. Okay. So again, I want to reiterate the need for odd numbers because row 4 will always begin and end with a regular double crochet at the first stitch and at the last stitch. So that way all the alternating front and back post stitches will be nestled in the center, okay? So we always end and begin with a regular double crochet. Now we're going to repeat. So this is the main pattern. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to row 1 and 2, which are simply single crochet stitches. And I'm going to get you started here, okay? So you'd come to the end, you're going to chain 1. We're going to go back to row 1 and row 2, which is just simply 1 single crochet into every stitch. And remember, in this project, I'm chaining 1 and going right into that very first stitch. So this first stitch, this first row is kind of easy to find your stitches. It just may be a little bumpy because some of them are front posts and some of them are back posts. So now we are working back into the stitches. So basically it's only row 4 where we work the back and the front posts. Okay, so you can see now that we've gone into single crochets, now it's just really going to allow those front and back post stitches to pop, so you can see the nice texture it creates there. Okay, so go ahead and do row 1 and 2 again. And I'm going to do another set just so you can see kind of how the texture comes out, okay? So row 1 and 2, single crochet, row 3, all double crochets, and then row 4, we're going to do our front and back post techniques. Okay, so I have done my repeat of row 1 and 2, and I'm actually going to kind of finish off the swatch here only because I'm running out of yarn and I don't want it to be confusing with a different color. So basically, I'm going to pull back my scarf here. Okay, so hopefully you can see that, you know, we've got the 2 rows, one of the posts, the regular double crochets, and then the 2 singles, which kind of separate each one. It just kind of allows you to really enjoy the front and the back post techniques by separating it with these 2 rows of single crochets. Now, at the ends, remember we talked about those establishing rows? I just kept it very simple, so that way we didn't take the ribbing right to the ends. It just kind of gave it this nice border. So if you're working on a blanket with this project, for example, you can really have a definite beginning and an end. So here I ended off the project with the 2 double crochet rows, the establishing rows, just like we did at the beginning. But I want you to notice something. And I kind of wrote out the design here. I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination, but hopefully this will make sense. So our establishing rows were here. We did our foundation chain, and then we did 2 rows of double crochets. Then we began our 4-row repeat. So row 1 and row 2 were single crochets, chain 1, single crochet. Row 3, we chained 1 and just did a regular row of double crochets. And then row 4, we chained 1. We began with a regular double crochet. Okay, regular double crochet. And then we did a front post and a back post, a front post and a back post. And that's what these little symbols mean here. Okay, so we alternate them. And then we ended with a regular double crochet. So now to create the length of your project, you would just then go back and repeat 1, 2, 3, 4, repeat 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up until you get the length that you want. When you're ready to finish your project, what we want to do is we want the bottom end and the top end to reflect each other. So because we had 2 rows of establishing the establishing row was 2 rows of double crochets. We want to make sure that when we're finished, we have 2 rows of double crochets at the end. Sounds pretty straightforward. Now, the only thing is, we want to remember that when we finish row 4, it will end with the front and back post. So we want to make sure that it's still kind of framed nicely with 2 rows of single crochets before we go and do our 2 rows of double crochets, okay? So see, because at the beginning, row 1 and 2 provided that nice little border just before we went into the double crochets. So we want to make sure whenever you're done your length and you've done your row 4 and you're ready to finish your project, we still have to go back and repeat row 1 and 2 before we go into the establishing rows. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So then at either end, you're always going to have 2 rows of double crochets and 2 rows of single crochets before you hit a texture. Just like up here, we have 2 rows of double crochets and 2 rows of single crochets before we hit the meat of our pattern. So if I were to turn it this way, you can now see that on either end of our work, and I just highlighted it in yellow so you can see the effect, that each end will look the same. If we didn't repeat row 1 and 2, this end of your work would just look like a whole bunch of double crochet stitches. And is it the end of the world if you did that? Nope. But I like to try and make things as nicely even as I can at the end. So let me just take, so this small swatch, you can see that, see the establishing row with the 2 single crochets, then we created our texture. And then I went and I repeated row 1 and 2 again, and it just really snuggles it in and it allows you to go, wow, really appreciate that front and back post pattern. So if I were finishing this now, I did row 1 and 2. Now I'm just going to go back and do my establishing rows, which are 2 rows of double crochet stitches. And I'm just going to do that real quick so that you can see the effect of how it's going to flank your work. Okay, so here we have it. So I've just finished off the 2 establishing rows, okay? And you'll notice sometimes it'll buckle in like that from the front post and the back post. Don't panic. That is normal. And as you work continuous rows, like if I show you this, see? It just kind of creates this pretty little bumpy edge. Now, you can always do a border, but I like the whole chunkiness of how this came out. So I kept it as a live edge. So you can see it just kind of comes in and out. But in this small sample, you should be able to see how the repeat row works. So if this was the chunk in the middle, our 2 establishing double crochets, 2 singles, and our texture. I finished with 2 rows of single crochets and then the 2 rows of double crochets. So hopefully that shows you how it'll just make your work look even from top to bottom. And actually, I'm really loving this color. So I hope you've enjoyed working on this pattern. And I'm actually really curious to see the types of projects that you're going to make. So again, really fantastic for working on scarves, blankets, baby blankets, all kinds of other things. Now, I want you to stay tuned because I'm going to be doing a companion tutorial to this pattern. I call this the Ribs and Rows pattern. And I'm going to show you how we're going to work the same pattern in the round. So there's just going to be a slight difference in the stitch count. And that's why I wanted to emphasize the how to work on patterns on flat projects as opposed to working in the round. And I'm really excited to show it to you because I'm going to make a companion actually to this scarf. So stay tuned. As always, guys, it is my absolute pleasure to have you coming along. I thoroughly enjoy sharing my love of crochet with you. And if you're new here and you haven't pressed that subscribe button, I really recommend you do so, because that way you'll know every time we upload. We upload every Wednesday. And sometimes we have a couple little bonuses that we upload on a Monday or a Friday. And it's just great having you guys come along. So press that subscribe button. And if it helps you, make sure to press that little bell notification. And then you'll definitely get notified every time one of our tutorials goes live. In the meantime, everyone, have a great day. Happy crocheting and take care.